Amelia had always cherished the moments of solitude she found in her old, secluded house. Nestled on the outskirts of town, it was a place where she could unwind after a long day at work. The house, passed down through generations, was her sanctuary, a place where she felt safe and at peace. Tonight, however, was different. Mark, her husband, was away on a business trip, and their daughter, Emily, was spending the weekend at a friend's house. The house felt eerily empty. As she settled onto the couch with a cup of tea, Amelia tried to focus on her book, but a sense of unease lingered in the back of her mind. The wind howled outside, rattling the old windows, and the usual comforting creaks of the house seemed louder, more ominous. Eventually, Amelia decided it was time to head to bed. She climbed the stairs, the wood groaning under her weight, and slipped into her room. She pulled the covers up to her chin, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had been gnawing at her all evening. The house, usually so familiar, now felt almost oppressive in its silence. Unable to sleep, Amelia decided to do a final check of the house. She moved quietly through the darkened rooms, making sure the windows and doors were securely locked. When she reached the kitchen, she froze. The back door, which she was certain she had locked earlier, was slightly ajar. A cold draft blew through the gap, sending a shiver down her spine. Her heart began to race as she approached the door, her mind racing with possibilities. Had she forgotten to lock it, or had someone been inside? Amelia quickly shut the door and locked it, her hands trembling. Trying to calm herself, she reminded herself that it was probably nothing. But the unease wouldn't go away. Her thoughts turned to the security cameras Mark had installed a few months ago. She rarely used them, but tonight she needed to be sure. She went to the small monitor in the living room and turned it on. The first camera showed the front yard nothing unusual. The second camera showed the driveway, empty except for her car. But when she switched to the third camera, which covered the backyard, her blood ran cold. There, standing just at the edge of the camera's view, was a figure. A man wearing a mask. For a moment, Amelia couldn't move. Her eyes were glued to the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden behind a white mask. He stood completely still, as if he knew he was being watched. Panic surged through her as she realized the man was just outside the back door, the door she had just locked. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But before she could press the call button, the man on the screen moved. He took a slow step forward, then another, heading directly toward the house. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she watched him approach. She could almost hear the crunch of his boots on the gravel, even though the camera had no audio. Finally snapping out of her daze, Amelia turned away from the monitor and began to search for a place to hide. The basement was out of the question, it was too isolated. The bedrooms upstairs seemed too far away, and she didn't want to risk making noise on the creaky stairs. Then she remembered the pantry in the kitchen. It was a small, enclosed space with a solid door, and it was right there. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She moved quickly, slipping into the pantry and closing the door as quietly as she could. The darkness inside was suffocating, but she forced herself to stay calm. With trembling fingers, Amelia finally pressed the call button on her phone and called the police. It rang twice before a calm voice answered. Amelia struggled to keep her voice steady as she whispered, "There's someone outside my house. He's wearing a mask, and I think he's trying to break in." "Where are you now?" the dispatcher asked. "I'm hiding in the pantry. I saw him on the security camera. He was coming toward the back door." "Stay where you are. I'm sending officers to your location. Keep quiet and don't leave your hiding spot." Amelia nodded, even though the dispatcher couldn't see her. She gripped her phone tightly, her knuckles white. The silence in the pantry was oppressive, and she strained to hear any sound from outside. The only thing she could hear was the faint sound of her own breathing and the thudding of her heart. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, she heard the sound of glass breaking. Her blood ran cold. The intruder had broken a window. He was inside the house. Amelia's heart raced as she heard the intruder moving through the house. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, each one sending a jolt of fear through her. She could hear him opening drawers, searching the kitchen, getting closer to her hiding spot. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't check the pantry. But then the footsteps stopped. He was standing right outside the pantry door. Amelia's grip tightened on the heavy cast iron skillet she had grabbed from the pantry shelf. It was the only thing she had to defend herself, but she wasn't sure it would be enough. The door handle began to turn, and Amelia felt her heart skip a beat. The door creaked open, and she could see the silhouette of the masked man standing in the doorway. He was tall, his broad shoulders filling the frame. The white mask he wore glowed eerily in the darkness. For a split second, Amelia considered attacking him, but fear held her back. What if she missed? What if he overpowered her? She stayed perfectly still, hoping he wouldn't see her in the shadows. The man hesitated, as if sensing her presence but unsure of where she was. Then, as if making a decision, he turned and walked away. Amelia could hear his footsteps moving back toward the broken window. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached the house. The intruder stopped, looking toward the noise. He seemed to realize he was out of time. With one last glance around the kitchen, he fled through the broken window. Amelia stayed frozen in place, listening as the police cars screeched to a stop outside. She heard the officers shouting as they entered the house, their footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. Finally, she allowed herself to breathe. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone. "I think he's gone," Amelia whispered, her voice shaky. "The officers are there now. Stay where you are. They'll find you." Amelia nodded, even though she was alone. She could hear the police moving through the house, their voices reassuring her that the danger was over. She stood up on shaky legs, opening the pantry door and stepping out into the kitchen. The cold air from the broken window hit her, and she shivered. The police searched the house, but the intruder was long gone. They found the broken window and signs that he had ransacked several rooms before fleeing, but there was no sign of him outside. He had vanished into the night, leaving Amelia shaken and terrified. Mark arrived home later that morning, his face pale with worry. He held Amelia tightly, apologizing for not being there when she needed him. She clung to him, feeling a wave of relief as she finally allowed herself to cry. The police advised them to stay elsewhere for a few days while they secured the house, so they went to Mark's parents' home. But even there, in the safety of family, Amelia couldn't shake the fear that had taken hold of her. The memory of the masked man haunted her, and she couldn't sleep, afraid that he would come back. The police never found the intruder. He was a phantom, a nightmare that had slipped away into the darkness. They installed new locks, reinforced the windows, and added more security cameras, but nothing could erase the fear that had rooted itself in Amelia's heart. The house, once her sanctuary, had become a place of terror. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind sent her heart racing. She knew she would never feel truly safe there again. But life went on, as it always does. Amelia returned to work, trying to find comfort in her daily routines. She kept the lights on at night, afraid to be alone in the dark. Slowly, she began to rebuild her sense of normalcy, but the memory of that night lingered. The fear that had taken root in her heart would never truly go away. It was a part of her now, a constant reminder of the fragility of safety. But she survived. She had faced the terror and lived to tell the tale. The house remained, a silent witness to the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. And though it would always carry the scars of that night, so too would Amelia. But she would carry on, living her life with the strength that had seen her through the darkest night of her life. And though she would never forget the fear, she knew that she was stronger than it. The house might have been the site of her greatest terror, but it was also where she had found the courage to survive.